Hi, good evening and welcome to this Tutor 2 revision live stream. This evening we are doing BTEC National Unit 3, which is Anatomy and Physiology for Health and Social Care. Your exam is in 2 weeks' time, so still plenty of time to revise. After this evening, I recommend, because this is our last live stream, that you go and look back through all of our replays. So as ever, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel so that you can contribute by typing in the chat. Let's load up the PowerPoint. Okay, so tonight we are going to be looking at 6 and 8 mark questions. These are the extended response items on your paper. I have some top tips for you. So first of all, 6 and 8 mark questions test your ability to make connections. So that's connections between common disorders and how those disorders affect human anatomical and physiological systems. What that means is how it affects organs and organ systems, so body systems. So sometimes a disorder might primarily affect the respiratory system, for example, but also have secondary or systemic effects on other body systems. So key to success in these long mark questions is knowing how those things interrelate and being able to explain them. So command words used are explain, discuss, and what. What is quite an unusual one, but I'll give you some examples in a moment. So to answer these questions, you will need to write in full sentences to create a nice logical answer. Okay, so on the screen now, with some examples of different 6 and 8 mark questions. So for example, you might have an explain question, usually worth 6 marks, but sometimes 8. An example of that might be explain how the disorder endometriosis affects the body. So if you look to the right-hand side, to answer that type of question, you need to come up with sentences that explain in detail how the disorder affects the body, sorry, that link to each other to form a logical answer supported by evidence. Then we've got discuss and what questions, worth 6 or 8 marks. So an example of a discuss the effects that stroke has on the body for 8 marks. And then for what effects does COPD have on body systems? Notice that one is systems, so plural, at least 2, maybe more if you can think of any more effects. So to answer those type of questions, you need to write sentences that discuss in detail how the disorder affects 2 or more body systems, showing knowledge of different aspects of the disorder and how they interrelate to form a logical answer supported by evidence. Okay, so my top tips now. Make sure you provide a detailed explanation or discussion. You need to give detail for this one. Don't just skirt over the top. I want to know why or how something is happening. So you need to provide a logical explanation or discussion, link your points to one another. As I said, you need to have reasoning, so how or why something is having an effect. And whilst marks are not awarded for each point you make, you could effectively make 6 points in a 6-mark question and 8 points in an 8-mark question, because there is that much content that you could talk about. You will need to have good knowledge of how each of the disorders named in the specification affect their primary body system. So, for example, you have some disorders linked under the reproductive system in the specification. So you need to know how those disorders affect that primary body system. But you also need to know if it has any possible effects on other body systems and the interrelationships between those effects. So everything we're going to do tonight is going to help you with that. So once I start the first activity, please do type your answers in the chat. Don't worry if you're not sure, put a question mark on it if you're not certain. It's all about testing out your ideas. So the first one, I want you to give me 2 ways that endometriosis affects the body, and I'm going to give you a 30-second timer. Off you go, please type your answers in the chat. Okay, I can see there's quite a few of you watching live at home. Please do type some answers. I'm looking at 2 ways that endometriosis affects the body. I am going to move on because I've got quite a lot to get through tonight and we only have 30 minutes, well, 26 minutes left now. So 2 of the things you could have given me would be okay, so the first one, endometriosis causes inflammation, pain and the formation of scar tissue on the female pelvic organs, which are uterus, ovaries, fallopian tubes, the bowel and the bladder. This is associated with female infertility. So if you joined us last week, you would have known that endometriosis is when tissue like the lining of the uterus, which is called the endometrium, grows outside of the uterus on other organs. Okay, so when this tissue grows on those other organs, for example, on the fallopian tubes, on the bowel, on the bladder, it causes irritation, inflammation, which means swelling and agitation, causes pain, and it makes scar tissue. And these are the things that then make it associated with female infertility. So let's move on to our next task, which is very closely related. So thinking about what I've just told you, I want you to give me 3 body systems that may be affected by endometriosis. So I'm looking for what is the primary body system affected. So if you know that, type it in the chat. And then 2 more body systems that may be affected. And remember what I said about the pain and scarring and inflammation that occurs in the pelvic cavity. So the pelvic cavity is anything below your diaphragm, below like your digestive system. It's from digestive system downwards basically. So any organs in there. So I'll give you 30 seconds again. I'm hoping that you can definitely give me the primary body system, even if you're not sure about the other 2. Okay, let's have a look at the answers and I'll talk you through them. So the primary body system affected is the female reproductive system. So endometriosis happens in people that are assigned female at birth, that's their sex at birth, and it is when, as I said, when the lining of the uterus, which is called the endometrium, overgrows and it grows outside of the uterus. It can grow on the external portions of the uterus, it can grow on the fallopian tubes, the ovaries. So it's a reproductive system disorder. However, as I said, the tissue can also grow on the bladder and the ureters, so it affects the renal system. And it can also grow on the bowel, which is part of your digestive system. So endometriosis doesn't just affect the reproductive system, it has effects on the rest of the body too. So another linked activity now. This is tug of war. I'm going to present you with two answers or parts of an answer from students, and I want to know which is the best answer to the question. So the question the student has been asked is, explain how the disorder endometriosis affects the body. And what we're looking at now is like the opening statements of these two students' answers, student A, student B. So student A has said, endometriosis causes heavy menstrual bleeding and pain. It can also cause problems with getting pregnant. The pain can be worse when going to the toilet. Many women have this. It can affect quality of life quite significantly. It is unpleasant. On the other hand, student B has said, causes inflammation, pain and the formation of scar tissues to female pelvic organs. This inflammation and scarring can contribute to subfertility or infertility when it occurs on the ovaries and fallopian tubes. When on the bladder, it can cause bladder irritation, urgency and pain, as well as blood in the urine. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to decide, is answer A or answer B better or stronger? And if you can, let me know why you think that. So I will start us off and give us a 30-second timer.
3, 2, 1, fight!
Okay, so let's have a think about these two responses. So, response B is the stronger one, but let's start with response A. So response A does contain accurate information. Everything included in that paragraph there is accurate. However, it's not specifically detailing the effects of endometriosis on specific or named organs or body systems. So it's also lacking key vocational terminology and language, and it reads more like a list rather than a logical answer. So that could be a bulleted list, couldn't it, rather than a discussion or an explanation. Whereas if you look at response B, you can see that it's stronger. So it contains key terminology. So it talks about inflammation, scar tissue, female pelvic organs, subfertility, which if you don't know, subfertility is difficulties getting pregnant, but you can get pregnant. And then it says infertility. So infertility is the, in a female, is the inability to get pregnant. So you can't get pregnant at all. It names ovaries and fallopian tubes, and it talks about the bladder and symptoms that may affect the bladder. So this is a really good explanation of how the disorder endometriosis affects the body. I don't have a lot of space on my screen. If I was marking this as an examiner, I would like to see more expansion for 6 marks than what is currently on the screen. And I would like to know about the reproductive system as the primary system affected by this disorder, or the place where this disorder originates. I want to know that the bladder is part of the renal system or the urinary system, and just a little bit more detail. But B is definitely a stronger response. Okay, let's move on to our next activity. So obviously there are lots of body systems in the specification. We can't cover all of them, so I've chosen 3. So Moving on, we're looking at stroke now. So generally speaking, we categorise stroke into two main types. I want to know if you know those two types. I'm going to give you 30 seconds. If you know one, just type it in the chat. I don't mind whether you give me a key term for it or if you explain it, but I'd rather have the key term if you know it. So let's start off with that 30 seconds. Okay, so our two main types of stroke are ischemic stroke. So ischemic strokes are caused by a blockage of an artery. About 87% of all strokes are ischemic. This word ischemic comes from a term called ischemia, which means oxygen deprivation. Okay, so ischemic strokes are caused by a blockage of the artery, so the blood can't get through, so the oxygen doesn't get through. The second type is hemorrhagic. These strokes are caused by bleeding, and about 13% of all strokes are hemorrhagic. So hemorrhagic strokes are much less common. Hemorrhagic comes from a word heme, which means blood, and hemorrhage, which means losing blood. So hemorrhagic means something that's characterised by the loss of blood. So this can happen when an artery bursts, for example, and then obviously that interrupts the blood flow to the brain. So we know that in a stroke, hopefully, we all know this, it's called, what happens is the blood flow to the brain is compromised in some way, either by a blockage or by a hemorrhage, and then that means that oxygen doesn't get to the brain tissue. So linked activity coming up. Can you give me 3 ways that stroke can affect the body? Remember what I just said? It's when not enough blood flow, so therefore not enough oxygen gets to your brain. So give me 3 ways stroke can affect the body. Okay, let's reveal our answers. So stroke can affect the body in a huge variety of ways. These are some of the kind of most common or the most well known. So stroke can cause muscle weakness. So for example, someone that has a stroke may be unable to lift their arms up in front of them or sustain holding their arms up in front. Often it's more pronounced on one side than the other, usually the left side, but not always. Muscle weakness can also contribute to the face drooping. So right now my muscles, we don't realise, but my muscles are working in my face. If I have a stroke and it affects the muscles in my face, then one side of my face could droop, or I might not be able to smile. It can cause eating and swallowing issues, which in part are due to muscle weakness issues, but other things as well. And it can also cause incontinence, which means not being able to control your bladder and or your bowels. Okay, so we've thought about types of stroke and ways that stroke can affect our bodies. So a linked activity to that. I want to know about body systems affected by stroke. So can you give me 2 body systems affected by stroke? I would like to know ideally the primary one. So what part of your body does a stroke originate from? So where's the problem happening? And then there's one really key body system that is affected after a stroke occurs. Can you tell me what that is? I'll give you 30 seconds. Okay, let's have a look at our answers. So stroke is a disorder of the cardiovascular system. So a stroke occurs when something goes wrong with the cardiovascular system. As I said, either arteries becoming blocked with atherosclerosis, so that is that could be, you know, those fatty plaque deposits that build up on the inside of the arteries and restrict the blood flow. It can also be caused by smoking. So if someone smokes a lot, the smoking, the chemicals in the cigarettes, in the tobacco, damage the inside of the arteries. And once your arteries get damaged, that makes them more sticky and attractive to these plaques, these deposits. So that can then build up. The other thing that happens is the artery becomes less stretchy. So arteries work by stretching and then shrinking back again. But if they become too damaged by smoking or by fatty deposits, they get hard and inflexible, and that can cause problems with blood pressure and so on. And then once a stroke occurs, so either the arteries become blocked with a blood clot or with too much fatty deposits, or an artery has hemorrhage, so burst, an aneurysm, and bled, then the blood flow doesn't get to the brain, the oxygen doesn't get to the brain, so the brain becomes damaged, and that is the nervous system that is affected. And then, of course, because the brain is like the control centre, it's in part of your central nervous system, it controls all your physiological functions. Stroke can be systemic, so it can affect all the systems in your body. Okay, so linked to that, a new tug of war. So I want to know which is the best answer to this question. So the question is, discuss the effects that stroke has on the body. So this would be an 8-mark question. So what you see on the screen is representative of a part of an 8-mark answer, not a full answer. So student A has said, stroke originates in the cardiovascular system when an artery becomes blocked or an artery bleeds, causing loss of blood flow and subsequently oxygen to the brain. This causes damage to the brain, which is part of the central nervous system. It is thus possible for stroke to affect any of the other body systems as the brain controls their functions. And then student B has said, stroke can be assessed through the acronym FAST. Face is the face drooping. A is their arm weakness. S is speech slurred. T, time, call 999 immediately. This shows that the body is affected widely and it's very serious. Action needs to be taken to treat the person before damage is permanent. So what I want you to do is read through those again and have a think to yourself, which is the stronger answer? Is it A or B? And also, why is one stronger than the other, or why is one weaker than the other? So I'll give you the 30 seconds again.
3, 2, 1, fight!
Okay, so this time student A has the stronger answer. So it's a stronger response, it contains key terminology, and it explains how the disorder of stroke affects organs and organ systems or body systems. It's logical and ordered, and I'm hopeful as an examiner that the learner would go on to discuss how other systems can be affected due to the brain's role as a control centre. Okay, so that's a really nice way to start off a discussion on stroke. The B response, on the other hand, does contain accurate information. FAST is the acronym that we use to assess for a stroke. You can use this if you're worried about someone in your family. It's what paramedics use to assess for a stroke as well. But it's not specifically detailing the effects of stroke on specific or named organs or body systems. It's lacking some key vocational terminology. And again, it's more like a bulleted list, isn't it, than a logical answer that shows interrelationships between affected body systems. And that's the key, isn't it, to these questions, is having a logical answer that shows those interrelationships, because remember AO3 is make connections. Okay, so our final kind of theme tonight is going to be COPD. So what I want to know is what should go under the umbrella and the umbrella is how COPD affects the body. So we've got 8 effects there. Some of them are directly linked to COPD. They are effects of COPD on the body. Some of them are not. So I'm going to give you 60 seconds to work out what goes under the umbrella. Love that dramatic music. Okay, so let's have a look what fits under this umbrella. Okay, so the effects that fit underneath are alveoli. Remember, that's the little grape-like structures, the little sacs inside the lungs, lose their ability to stretch and to shrink. So alveoli need to be able to inflate and deflate slightly like a balloon. The airways in your lungs narrow, excess mucus production, so that means producing lots of phlegm and lots of mucus, and walls between alveoli are destroyed. So they're all effects of COPD. The ones above the umbrella, so the ones that don't fit underneath, hardening of arteries, lack of blood flow to the brain, blood clot breaks off, arteries become narrow. They are all linked to stroke, which we've just talked about. Okay, so still on the COPD theme, I'm going to give you another 60-second activity. I want you to categorise these symptoms of COPD into one of 3 categories. So respiratory, cardiovascular or muscular. So all these symptoms on the screen can be categorised as respiratory symptoms, cardiovascular symptoms or muscular symptoms. Your role is to work out which one goes where. 60 seconds of dramatic music again. Okay, let's have a look at our answers. Okay, so the respiratory symptoms. So COPD is primarily a disorder of the respiratory system, okay? As we learned from the previous activity, it affects the airways, the lungs, the alveoli within the airways, airways, not airwaves, and you produce excess mucus. So respiratory symptoms are your primary symptoms. Shortness of breath, because you feel like you can't get enough air in because your alveoli are stiff and not flexible. Persistent chesty cough because of all that additional mucus, persistent wheezing because the airways are narrowed, and frequent chest infections because your respiratory system is compromised. So then your cardiovascular symptoms are hypertension, which is the vocational term for high blood pressure, and congestive heart failure. Congestive heart failure is when the heart is overworking and can't pump hard enough to distribute all the blood around the body. And then the muscular symptoms are skeletal muscle dysfunction and loss of muscle mass. So people with COPD often lose weight, but it's not a loss of fat, or it's not that they lose their appetite, it's that their muscle mass actually reduces. And we may not be fully clear on the reasons why, but if you think about COPD affecting the amount of oxygen that someone can take in, and then that affects the amount of oxygen that the individual tissues get. We can see how this could definitely affect our muscles, because our muscles need large amounts of energy, and from which we need oxygen to form that energy. So the muscles can be severely affected. Okay, this is our final activity for this live stream, and it's called Podium Finish. So I'm going to give you again 3 answers this time, and I want to know which is the number 1 winner, which is the runner-up, so the second place, and which comes third. And the question is, what effects does COPD have on body systems? So I will give you the paragraphs. I will read them out to you, and then I'll give you 30 seconds to have a think. So student A says, COPD causes issues for the breathing system, such as shortness of breath and blue lips. It can also cause a cough and wheezing. It can also affect the heart, because heart and lungs are linked and must work together. Student B says, COPD primarily affects the respiratory system, causing inflammation of the airways and alveoli in the lungs, which lose their stretch. This affects the body's ability to receive enough oxygen through gas exchange, resulting in symptoms such as shortness of breath, coughing and wheezing. Long term, this can result in cardiovascular symptoms such as congestive heart failure, where the heart muscle struggles to pump sufficient blood and oxygen around the body as it overworks, trying to compensate for weakened lungs. And student C says, COPD affects the respiratory system, causing problems with airways and lungs and affecting breathing. So I'll give you 30 seconds. If you could tell me which you think is the best, so is A, B or C number 1 for you, and then which is the runner-up, so is A, B or C number 2 for you, and then which is third place. Okay, I'll give you 30 seconds. Radzy's straight in already. Does anyone else agree or disagree with Radzy? Let us know. Radzy, if you could maybe type in the chat why you think number 1 is best, that would be great. Okay, I absolutely agree with you, Radzy. That is how I have ordered them as well. Okay, so the reason that I have made B the winner is it has sufficient detail. It tells me about the primary system, body system being affected, which is the respiratory system, and it tells me how the respiratory system is affected. It tells me about the effects of that, so not receiving enough oxygen through gas exchange, and then the impact. Yep, Radzy says more depth in the explanation, yeah. And then this student has thought, hang on a minute, I need to talk about multiple body systems here. So then they talk about how it affects the cardiovascular system, and they make a really nice link there between how COPD, which is primarily respiratory, so how everything that's going on with COPD can then affect the heart. So that's a brilliant response. I agree with Radzy. I put student A in second place. So they have talked about COPD affecting the respiratory system, but they said breathing system, which is not quite as accurate a key term. They talk about shortness of breath and blue lips, but haven't explained how or why that is happening. Same with the cough and the wheezing. And then they have made the link to the cardiovascular system, but maybe the student doesn't know the details, so they've kind of like kept it a bit vague. Okay, so yes, it's true, heart and lungs do work together, but they haven't told us how or why that is an issue in COPD. And then again, student C in third place, because they talk about the respiratory system and how it affects airways, lungs and breathing, but there's no more detail than that. Okay guys, so just go back to our tips. Remember, when you are asked to what or discuss or explain for 6 or 8 marks, you need to give detailed explanation or discussion. It has to be a logical and coherent answer, not a list or a bullet pointed list. It needs to be like paragraphs that show explanation, discussion and the points linked to one another. You need to give me some reasoning, so how or why something is happening or an effect is occurring. And then, like I said, although marks are not awarded for each point you make, when you've written everything down, have a look through and think, have I made at least 6 points or have I made at least 8 points here? And remember, you need to have good knowledge of how each of the disorders named in the spec affect the primary body system, but also effects on other body systems and the interrelationships if you can. It's a lot, but I know that you guys can do it. As I said at the beginning, you've got your exam in 2 weeks' time, so good luck with that. This is our last live stream before that exam. But do go back and watch the replays. They're all on YouTube. There is a playlist for Unit 3 and there's also a BTEC National Revision playlist as well. Also, if you visit the Tutor2You website, you can download the PowerPoints from all the live streams, so make sure you do that too. And there's also a YouTube video which is a walkthrough of the Unit 3 paper. So good luck everyone and take care, and I will see you soon. Thank you, bye.